Please, it's my future.
Rules are
The
rules.
little girl's voice cracked as she dropped to her knees and reached for the torn pieces scattered across the office floor. The principal did not even look down at her.
Rules are
Rules
rules.
are rules, she said flatly, already reaching for the phone on her desk. That was the exact moment the door opened behind them. The room went silent. A voice cut through it. What is going on here? The principal's face drained of color. Sir? The father's expression never changed. He simply looked at the man in the doorway and waited. I asked what happened here, the voice repeated, quieter this time, and somehow colder for it. Before we get into what happened in that office, if stories like this one hit home for you, go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's go back to where it all started. Marcus Bennett had learned a long time ago that some rooms decide who you are before you ever open your mouth. He was 40 years old, a widower for the last 3 years, raising his daughter Zoe mostly on his own in a modest 2-story house on the edge of town. His wife Mia had passed after a short illness, and in the time since, Marcus had built his entire life around one simple goal, making sure his daughter never had to wonder if she was loved enough to matter. He drove her to school every morning. He braided her hair on the mornings the ponytail wouldn't sit right. He never once let his work follow him into the kitchen where the two of them ate dinner together every single night. Nobody at Zoe's old school knew that the quiet man who dropped his daughter off in a plain gray sedan had spent the last decade quietly funding education programs for kids who never got a fair shot at anything. Marcus preferred it that way. He did not want his daughter growing up believing that a person's worth could be measured by a title or a number in a bank account. He wore the same jacket he'd had for years, kept his answers short when people asked what he did for a living, and let his work speak in rooms he never had to enter himself. That morning, Zoe sat at the kitchen table in her school uniform 2 days early, just so she could see how it looked. "Daddy, do you think they really have robots at my new school?" she asked, swinging her legs under the chair. Soft laugh. "I heard they do. Robots and a garden and a library bigger than our whole house." Zoe's eyes went wide. "Bigger than our whole house? That's what they tell me." She grinned and pulled the admission letter out from under her plate, where she'd hidden it the night before, smoothing out a crease that was already smooth. "Do you think Mommy would have been proud of me?" she asked quietly, not looking up. Marcus set down the cereal box. For a moment he didn't have an answer ready, and he let himself sit in that silence instead of rushing past it. "She would be so proud of you that she'd probably embarrass you at the front gate." Zoe laughed, the kind of laugh that made the whole kitchen feel lighter. "I'm going to study really hard, so hard that one day I can take care of you." Marcus knelt down to her eye level. "That's not your job, baby, not for a long time." "I know, but I still want to." His phone buzzed on the counter, a name flashing on the screen that he silenced without looking at twice. Zoe noticed. "Who was that?" "Nobody important," he said, sliding the phone into his pocket. "Not more important than cereal with you, anyway." It wasn't a lie, not really. It just wasn't the whole truth either, and Marcus had gotten good at leaving certain doors only halfway open. They arrived at Ridgeview Preparatory Academy just before 9 that morning, Zoe clutching her admission letter in both hands the entire walk from the car. The building was tall and pale stone, with banners out front announcing the new academic year. A woman near the entrance glanced at Marcus twice, then a third time, her brow furrowing slightly as though she were trying to place a face she couldn't quite locate in her memory. She didn't say anything. She just watched him a beat too long before turning back to the parent beside her. Inside the front office, a line of parents waited to finish enrollment paperwork. Behind the front desk sat a woman in her 50s with sharp reading glasses and sharper posture, a nameplate reading Principal Vivian Cross, angled toward the room like a small warning sign. Beside her stood a younger staff member, Miss Reyes, sorting through a stack of folders with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to stay out of her boss's way. Zoe stepped up to the desk first, beaming. "Hi, I'm Zoe Bennett. I got in." She said it like the words themselves were a gift she'd been waiting to give someone. Principal Cross looked up slowly, first at Zoe, then at Marcus, her eyes moving over his plain jacket and the modest car visible through the window behind him. "Bennett?" she repeated, scanning a clipboard without much interest. "Let me see the letter." Zoe handed it over with both hands, the way you'd hand someone something fragile. Principal Cross unfolded it, read maybe half of it, and set it down with a small, unimpressed exhale. "This scholarship code doesn't match anything in our current system. Where exactly did you get this?" Marcus kept his voice even. "It was mailed to us in June, same as every other accepted student, I'd assume." "I'd assume most things aren't what they appear to be," Cross said, not quite looking at him. Zoe's smile faltered slightly, though she didn't fully understand why yet. Miss Reyes glanced up from her folders. "I can pull the enrollment record in about 2 minutes, Principal Cross, if that would help clear it up." "That won't be necessary," Cross said, cutting her off before she could reach for the keyboard. "I've seen this before. People find these scholarship codes online and print something that looks official enough to get past a front desk." Marcus felt Zoe's hand tighten slightly around his fingers. "Ma'am," he said, calm but firm, "all I'm asking is that you make one phone call to the district office. It'll take less time than this conversation already has." Cross set the letter down and crossed her arms. "This letter is a fraud, and quite frankly, so is the story behind it." She said it loud enough for the row of waiting parents to hear, and a few heads turned. A man near the door leaned to the woman beside him and murmured something Marcus couldn't quite catch, though the sideways glance that followed told him enough. Zoe's grip on his hand tightened further. "Daddy, why is she being mean to us?" Marcus knelt slightly, keeping his voice low just for her. "Sometimes people judge before they listen, sweetheart." "Does she hate us?" Marcus paused, searching for an answer that wouldn't feel like a lie. "I don't know, baby." It was the most honest thing he could offer her in that moment, and it cost him something to say it. Cross straightened her blazer and addressed the room more than she addressed Marcus. "I've dealt with this exact situation before, families showing up with paperwork that was never verified by our office, hoping nobody checks closely enough to notice." Zoe looked up at her father, confusion and fear starting to blend together on her small face. "We didn't make it up," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "I studied so hard." More parents in the waiting area had stopped pretending not to watch what was happening. One woman took her phone out of her purse, angling it just slightly toward the front desk. Nobody said anything to stop what was happening. Nobody stepped forward. Ms. Reyes shifted uncomfortably behind the desk, glancing toward Cross, then toward Marcus, clearly torn between what she was watching and what she felt safe enough to say out loud. "I'm going to need you to step away from the desk," Cross said, reaching for the phone on her desk. "I'll be contacting security to have you escorted off the premises while we sort this out." Zoe's eyes went wide. "Security?" Her voice cracked on the word. She looked up at her father, searching his face for reassurance he wasn't entirely sure he could give her. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Marcus pulled her gently against his side. "No, sweetheart, we didn't do anything wrong." But his voice, for the first time that morning, had lost a little of its steadiness. That's where we're going to pause the story for a moment. If you want to see what happens when that office door finally opens and who exactly walks through it, stay with me, because everything is about to change in a way none of them saw coming. Part 2. Principal Cross picked up the letter off the desk, holding it by one corner as though it were something distasteful. "I'm not in the habit of letting families walk in here with paperwork that doesn't check out," she said, loud enough that the entire office had gone quiet to listen. Zoe stepped forward, tears already gathering in her eyes. "Please," she said, her small voice shaking. "It's my future."
Cross didn't even glance down at her. Rules are rules. And then, in one motion, she tore the letter cleanly in half. The gold seal split down the middle. Zoe's breath caught in her throat, and the sound she made wasn't quite a sob yet, just the sharp intake of a child watching something break that she didn't know how to fix. She dropped to her knees, gathering the torn pieces off the floor with trembling hands, as though gathering them fast enough might undo what had just happened. "Please," she whispered again, to no one in particular now, "it's my future." That was the exact moment the office door opened. The room went silent, the kind of silence that has weight to it. A voice cut through from the doorway. "What is going on here?" Every head in the office turned at once. Principal Cross's face drained of color in a way that made even the parents near the door stop scrolling their phones. "Sir?" she managed. Marcus's expression didn't change. He simply turned toward the voice and waited, one hand resting gently on his daughter's shoulder. "I asked what happened here," the man repeated, quieter now and somehow colder for it. The man in the doorway was Dr. Alan Whitmore, superintendent of the district, dressed in a plain gray coat, not unlike Marcus's own, carrying a leather folder under his arm. He had come to Ridgeview that morning for an entirely different reason, to finalize paperwork on a new scholarship partnership with a private education foundation that had quietly funded opportunities for dozens of children across the district over the past several years. He took 2 steps into the office before his eyes landed on the torn letter still scattered near Zoe's knees, then on Marcus's face. Something in his expression shifted from confusion to recognition in the space of a single breath. "Mr. Bennett," he said, and the way he said it made every person in that office suddenly reconsider everything they thought they understood about the last 10 minutes.
Principal Cross opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I was told there was a discrepancy with the paperwork," she said quickly. "I was simply following protocol." Dr. Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" Cross glanced at Marcus, then at Zoe, then back at the superintendent, searching for some version of the last 10 minutes that might still make sense. She didn't answer because she didn't have one. Dr. Whitmore turned to the room, his voice steady enough to carry. "Mr. Bennett is the founder of the Bennett Family Foundation, the very scholarship program that brought this little girl to your front desk this morning was created and funded by him, quietly, without his name ever attached to it publicly." He paused, letting that settle over the room. "The code on that letter isn't fraudulent. It's real, because he made it real, for children exactly like her." A woman near the door lowered the phone she'd been recording with, exchanging a stunned glance with the person beside her. Cross straightened her blazer, attempting composure. "I was simply protecting the integrity of our admissions process," she said. "A man dressed the way he was, showing up without any prior introduction." "Is that the procedure?" Dr. Whitmore asked flatly. "Tearing a child's admission letter in front of her because you didn't recognize the coat her father was wearing?" Cross had no answer for that either. Miss Reyes, still standing behind the desk, finally spoke. "For what it's worth, I offered to verify the enrollment record twice. I was told it wasn't necessary." Cross shot her a look, but the damage of the admission had already landed in the room. Marcus knelt down beside his daughter, gently helping her gather the last of the torn paper from the floor. "It's okay," he told her softly. "We're going to fix this." Zoe looked up at him, tears still on her cheeks. "But it's ripped, Daddy. How do you fix ripped?" He didn't have a perfect answer for that either, not yet, but he held her hand and let that be enough for the moment. Dr. Whitmore asked Cross to surrender her office keys pending a formal review, informing her that the district would be conducting a full investigation into how the admissions office had handled her file, and whether this was an isolated incident or part of a pattern.
Within days, that question was answered. Records showed at least half a dozen prior complaints against Cross, families who had been questioned, delayed, or quietly discouraged from enrolling, most of them families who looked a great deal like Marcus and Zoe. None of those complaints had ever been escalated beyond a folder in a drawer. Cross was removed from her position within the week. The story, once it reached the local news, spread further than anyone expected, not because of the scholarship or the money behind it, but because of a 10-second clip a parent had recorded of a little girl on her knees gathering the torn pieces of her own future off an office floor. Commentators argued about it for days, but the loudest response by far came from parents who said the same thing over and over in different words. That could have been my daughter.
Marcus never gave a single interview about it. He turned down every request, choosing instead to sit with Zoe each evening and let the noise stay exactly where it belonged, outside their front door. But one night, about a week after it happened, Zoe looked up from her dinner and asked him a question that stayed with him longer than anything Cross had said in that office. "Daddy," she said quietly, "what happens to the kids who don't have someone like you to protect them?" Marcus set down his fork. He didn't answer right away. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean," she said, choosing her words carefully the way she did when she was turning an idea over rather than just repeating it. "I got my letter back because you're you, but what about the little girl who doesn't have a daddy who can do that?" Marcus looked at his daughter for a long moment, and something in his chest settled into a decision he hadn't fully made until right then. "That's a really good question," he told her. "I think I know what we're going to do about it." In the weeks that followed, Marcus worked with the district, not to punish a single administrator further, but to make sure no other family would ever sit in that office the way he and Zoe had. Every enrollment dispute would now require a second staff member's review before any accusation of fraud could be made. Every scholarship recipient would be given a direct, private point of contact to verify their paperwork without ever having to defend themselves in a crowded waiting room. Families who had been quietly turned away in years past, the ones buried in old complaint files, were personally contacted and offered a fresh review of their applications. Ms. Reyes, the one staff member who had tried to speak up twice that morning, was promoted to oversee the new admissions verification process across the district, specifically because she had been the only person in that office willing to say something while everyone else stayed silent. 3 months later, Zoe walked back through the front doors of Ridgeview Preparatory Academy for the first day of orientation, her hand in her father's the same way it had been that first morning, though there was nothing tense in her grip this time. A new administrator greeted them warmly before they'd even said a word. Nobody's eyes lingered on Marcus's coat or the car they'd arrived in. Near the front office, the new principal, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Alvarez, met them with a small wooden box in her hands. "There's something we've been waiting to give you," she said, kneeling to Zoe's eye level. "What is it?" Mrs. Alvarez opened the box. Inside, resting on a bed of soft cloth, was Zoe's original admission letter, every torn piece carefully preserved, painstakingly restored and mounted behind glass, the gold seal whole again at the center. "My letter," Zoe whispered, reaching out but not quite touching it yet, as though she needed a moment to believe it was real. "No, sweetheart," Marcus said softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "That's your future." Zoe held the frame against her chest the way she used to hold the letter itself, and for a long moment she didn't say anything at all. Then she looked up at her father. "Daddy," she said quietly, "I don't want it to be the only one this happens for. I want every little girl to be treated like she matters, even if her dad isn't anybody special." Marcus knelt down and pulled her into a hug, and for once he didn't need to search for the right words, because she had already said the ones that mattered most. "If you had been standing in that office the day it happened, would you have spoken up, or would you have simply raised your phone and watched like everyone else did?
No child's dream should ever depend on how important, how wealthy, or how recognizable her father looks standing at a front desk. Marcus didn't win the day Dr. Whitmore walked through that door and called him sir. The real victory came weeks later when a little girl decided that her own restored future wasn't enough, not until every little girl walking through those doors could count on the same fairness she almost didn't get. If this story moved you, subscribe for more, and carry that same lesson with you the next time you're standing in a room where someone else is being underestimated.